It's about some time to talk some baseball here. When you think of baseball, you think of warm weather. It's a lot better than freezing. And who better to talk about baseball with than my friend Bill Chapman of Harvard University? A little background.
Tony, belated Happy New Year.
And the same to you. To give a little background for our audience who watches us from all areas of the globe and thinks we're nuts doing this in the cold, but they don't know what fun's about. Bill's been photographing for over 40 years. He was spending a lot of time as a young man at Fenway Park. In 1990, he began photographing baseball on a much broader scale all around the country, first in the majors and then in the minors. His work has appeared in many galleries and museums, including the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, the Sports Museum of New England, Gallery Caiaphas, and Panopticon Gallery, among others. A multitude of books and publications have incorporated his work, including Shutout, A Story of Race and Baseball in Boston by Howard Bryant, Yankee Century by Glenn Stout, and Glenn Stout and Richard Johnson, and Rickwood Field by Alan Barrett. And we're going to talk about Rickwood Field tonight, Bill. But what got you started on this journey of photography?
Well, I grew up down the street from Fenway, and the bus at the time, the T as we call it, was a nickel each way. My father would give me $1. It was 50 cents general admission, and that would leave me 40 cents to buy probably a Coke and 2 hot dogs and a program, and I lived pretty well off that $1. And, at the time, Tony, as you know, in the 50s, baseball was literally the only game in town.
It's really something. And, I know we've spoken about this, and I certainly don't want to make this the subject or the entire subject of our discussion, but Boston in the early years with the integration of baseball was really a tough place for players of color, as I would understand it.
Oh, absolutely. Boston was the last team to bring a player of color onto the team, and that was Pumpsie Green in 1959. The book Shutout, A Story of Race and Baseball, explains that story. It's a wonderful read if you ever want to catch up on just not that history, but going into the busing era and the different eras and problems people have had with the Red Sox.
It's really something, and it's something that today we go to a baseball game, we see all sorts of nationality represented and all sorts of country represented, but not that long ago, it really wasn't like that. And
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I didn't.
In 56, brought on Elston Howard. As we all know, of course, in 1947. The Brooklyn Dodgers brought in Jackie Robinson, and that opened a lot of opportunity.
And for certain, and the sacrifices these people made, and it's something. I mean, I think it's an era that should not be forgotten. I understand today would have been the birthday of Curt Flood, and here is a person who, for all he did in baseball and revolutionizing the game, I remember asking Billy Sample once, and I said, the ex-major leaguer, how many current players do you think know who Curt Flood is? He'd say, I'd be surprised if it was as much as half.
Oh, probably even less than that.
Yeah.
I would venture to guess.
It's
Since we have so many diversions today, Tony, as you know, between the internet, video, and soccer, and football, and basketball particularly, kids don't pay as much attention to sports heroes in baseball as we once did. Again, it used to be the only game in town.
For certain. Now, being the only game in town, you picked up a particular fascination for a baseball field in Birmingham, Alabama. Can you give us a little background on that?
Sure. I actually saw Pumpsie Green play on the Red Sox in 1962, and I've always been acutely aware of the racial divides. Again, busing in Boston when they tried to alter the basic pattern of children going to different schools. I was involved in that because I simply at the time had to walk through the National Guard to get to work. But I've always been aware of the problems generated by race, and I became friendly with the great civil rights and music and Negro League photographer Ernest Withers, who worked out of Memphis. And Ernest had photographed a lot of the Negro League players, etc. And the more I spent time with him, the more I wanted to learn about this. So I studied about it really hard. And what I would do is I would pick a southern city to fly to, and then take the bus to Memphis to see Ernest. And on one of my journeys, I went to Birmingham and discovered Rickwood Field. Rickwood Field was built in 1910. It's 2 years older than Fenway. And it was built by a man called A.H. Rickwood, and who was known as Rick, and he named the field for himself, Rick Wood. At the time, Birmingham was the steel capital of America, long before Pittsburgh, so there was a lot of money flying around to do this kind of thing. Now, at the time, the team was the Birmingham Barons, or any team that affiliated with, of course, the New York Yankees, Chicago White Sox, but they also had a Negro League team component, and it happened to be the Birmingham Black Barons. Now, when the main team was out of town, the owners would rent it to the Negro League team.
I understand. And we've got a few pictures here that we're going to show that you had sent along. To look at Rickwood Field in 1910 and to look at it today, would there be a great amount of differences?
No, Rickwood has been preserved as a National Historic Site, and it's pretty much the same as it was today. And I'll make an exception to that. Before 1964, during regulation baseball games, African Americans were only allowed to sit behind chicken wire in what were called the colored bleachers and the colored grandstand.
Amazing.
Yeah, there's a good book about that in the Southern League that I would highly recommend. It's called The Southern League, A True Story of Baseball, Civil Rights, and the Deep South's Most Compelling Pennant Race. It explains Rickwood and how during the height of the bombings in Birmingham, which included, of course, the murder of the 4 little schoolgirls, the owners of Rickwood said, we're going to take down the wire and we're going to desegregate. Now, at the time, Rickwood was the minor AA team of the Kansas City Athletics, owned by Charlie Finley. So in this year of baseball in 1964, Vita Blue was their star, Bert Campaneris, a lot of names that we were familiar with today. And on their opening night, the owner had to make a deal with the Ku Klux Klan not to bomb the park.
Oh, my
They
Lord.
were desegregating. And the opposing pitcher for the Mobile Bay Bears was Ferguson Jenkins.
Amazing.
Against Vita Blue.
It almost makes me harken back to those stories which I heard when Yankee Stadium, or the old Yankee Stadium, was rebuilt in 1976. One day, one of George Steinbrenner's aides was running down his budget, and he sees in the budget Muslims, or black Muslims, and a certain amount of money. And he said, George, what is this? He said, well, I'm paying the Muslims to keep order around here so we can keep the traffic flowing and keep the neighborhood safe and keep everything moving. It's like...
I've never heard that. That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
But also, too, stepping back a little further than 1964, in 1948, the Birmingham Black Barons made it to the Negro League World Series. Now, during the season, they had an underage high school player who started playing with them after school when he was 16. You might have heard of him, Tony. His name was Willie Mays.
Yeah, he was a kid ball player with limited success.
Yes, and he played under a phony name because he would have sacrificed his standings further on as a major league player if it was known that he was playing that young and under those circumstances. But there's a great book about that called Willie's Game, about the year that the Birmingham Black Barons went to the Negro League World Series.
It's an amazing story. Now, the Rickwood Field, during its existence, its broad brush existence, 1910 until now, was there a period of time when it fell into disrepair and it wasn't being used? And, perhaps people said, well, why don't we tear it down? It's an eyesore.
Not really, because fortunately enough, the city maintains it. The Barons, the Birmingham Barons, the AA team of the Chicago White Sox, played there until the 80s, and that's when the movement started to make it a historical site, etc. But also colleges have used it and continue to do so. High schools use it. It's available for functions, like conventions coming in and that kind of thing. And it has such a great history that a lot of people coming to Birmingham go to see it. And also in conjunction with that, once a year, they have a game called the Classic, in which the AA team will come from their stadium on the edge of town and play a regulation game in period uniforms at Rickwood. And I've been fortunate enough to attend that for the last 12 years. In conjunction with that, they also bring in somebody who was associated with the Southern League during their careers. And I have met and photographed and pleasantly talked to people like Harmon Killebrew and Gaylord Perry and Ferguson Jenkins and Dale Murphy, who all got their start in the Southern League. And in the last 2 years, they've had Dwight Gooden and Darryl Strawberry, even though they weren't specifically associated with the Southern League. After a while, it gets to be of who they can afford and how much money they have.
Understand.
The fee is nominally about $5,000 with a hotel room and celebration in the player's honor. Listen to this, Tony. Reggie Jackson wants $25,000 to appear, throw out a pitch, and sign autographs for 2 hours.
Well, then again, it's about the magnitude of him, Bill.
Exactly, but he played AA ball there. He was on the Birmingham A's. We'll keep it clean. It's amazing. Now, in the pictures, on a happier note that you sent over, very nice picture of Darryl Strawberry. That was a wonderful, wonderful moment for a lot of people. Darryl, as you may know, is now a fully ordained minister and is very, very serious about staying sober and his relationship to God. He has started 2 halfway homes, 2 shelters, for teenage boys in Florida. And he will really not talk about baseball. But he was introduced to the Negro League players, and they, of course, were astounded by him, as he was very, very happy to meet them. And I got a nice picture of them all together. They were all just beaming with each other's presence.
And that's absolute. He was, when he was on, what a ball player he was.
Oh, he certainly was. And the year before, I met Dwight Gooden, who was certainly on too. And they both, ran afoul of their demons, and both were able to work their way back.
And
to the extent that they can, maintain their past as a separate entity and help people by talking about it.
Yeah, and it's nice that they have. Now, the Negro Leagues themselves, when was there like a last year of existence saying after year X there was no evidence of Negro League baseball, or did it really kind of die off with a whimper?
Well, it did. It died off with a long whimper. Of course, after Jackie Robinson came up, a lot of teams brought up players. Larry Doby. I'm drawing a blank here, but you know some of the names.
Sure. Yeah, Don Newcomb, Joe Black.
Don Newcomb.
Yeah.
But it also took the spirit out of the Negro Leagues in that the best players were coming up. The Negro League survived through the 50s, but by 1961, there were only 4 teams, and the Kansas City Monarchs were barnstorming out of Chicago. So essentially they were dead as we knew them in the early 50s. The popular
And the records of the Negro Leagues, the actual games played, and the championships, and the batting records and the pitching records, is there a good trail on that, or is a lot of that just lost to history?
No, a lot of it is lost to history. The reasons being is that each major city would only have one African American newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
So they weren't concerned with running box scores every day. If, say, the Barons were out of town in Kansas City, the Barons might send back a report that they won even when they didn't, and that would run in the local paper. The records were really spotty, and there are some amazing men, Larry Lester and Dick Young among them, that have traced a lot of this history back, or at least as much as possible.
I understand. I was reading that the Polo Ground seats, or some of the Polo Ground seats, found their way into Rickwood.
Yes. Rickwood, for a while, survived on the kindness of others, and they were given a set of gold seats by a local football team down there. Some of the Polo Ground seats were given to them. And I think they took some of them out for resale, or some of the guys just wanted to have one.
Sure.
I'm not sure how many are still left in the stands.
Yeah, they're quite sought after collector's items, that's for sure. And I guess in our waning moments, and it's amazing, you always get close to running out of time. Has Major League Baseball recognized Rickwood and extended any goodwill or contribution or acknowledgement?
No, I don't think so. The 100th anniversary, of course, was in 2010, and it didn't generate as much publicity as I thought it would have. Publicity coming in the terms of more donations, etc. But it's been used as a movie site for several major movies, including the Cobb movie with Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah.
And
one of your favorites. One of your favorites.
What's my favorite?
No, you like the Cobb movie.
I watched the Cobb movie, but also more recently, 42 was made mostly at Rickwood.
Yeah, and
Jackie Robinson's story.
And that was interesting, and it really was. The graphics in that movie I found to be somewhat amazing. In our closing moments, Bill, what will be the next series of events at Rickwood Field, and why should people get down and see what's happening there?
Well, in May, I don't have the date in front of me. It is the last week in May on a Wednesday. I believe it's the 29th, is the Rickwood Classic. This year's guest will be Raleigh Fingers, throwing up the first pitch and signing autographs. Also, recently in Birmingham, they have just opened up Southern League, Negro League Museum. I haven't been down to see it yet, but that's another reason to go there. And just to sit at Rickwood for this classic game, they pick up a year from their past, and they'll be wearing the uniforms, and people will come dressed in that period, and all the surviving Negro League players that can attend do show up. It's quite a spectacle. As many as 60 former Negro League players will show up, and I think there's about 180 of them left alive now in total.
That's a wonderful thing. Well, Bill, so pleased to have you tonight. Thank you for stopping off and being with us. And where can our friends and fans reach you, and you can share your fine work and your knowledge of baseball history, and also the honeymooners?
Where can they reach me? I have a website. It's colorofbaseball.com, and they can send me email through that. That's probably the way to make me most accessible, or come May 29th, I'll see you in the grandstand at Rickwood.
Yeah, or, let me know and I'll tell you what Bill is doing. Bill, go back and stay warm. Thanks for being with us. Thank you for sharing Rickwood Field with us, and have a great year, and sure we'll be talking soon.
Thank you, Tony. Great to talk to you again.
And that was Bill Chapman, my friend. And as we get off the wire, we are going to be joined very soon. Not joined very soon, but we're going to have some magnificent retro commercials So you get warm, have a lot of fun watching these things, and you could dream about what these cars used to be or what they were. Life is a ball game. Tonight it's a cold ball game. Tony D'Angelo, Coast to Coast. We'll be back in a little bit. We've had quite a time recently in the state of Connecticut with a number of developments, none of them seemingly good. We're going to talk about two tonight. The first is going to be the Hartford Yard Goats Stadium debacle. The second, perhaps of much greater import, but, maybe not necessarily more serious, but serious in other ways, is the departure of GE, General Electric, from the state after a long tenure here. Who better to have on to discuss these things is my friend and a friend of this show, Professor Bob Swick. And Bob, first of all, how are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Tony. Thank you for having me on the show this evening.
It is always my pleasure. And let's begin with the stadium. And we've got some time. Tell us what you know. Tell us what happened from the beginning. I'm reading this and I'm just thinking to myself, they had a perfectly happy little franchise there in New Britain. They were a community staple. And now you've got this team flopping around with no stadium and no place to play and a whole bunch of fingers pointing and a whole bunch of unaccounted money. And welcome to Connecticut. You're for it.
To try to summarize this, and it's somewhat difficult to follow what actually occurred because I think there was a lot of stuff that was negotiated behind the scenes, unknown to the public to this day. Apparently, former mayor of Hartford, Pedro Suguera, approached the New Britain Rockettes owner, Josh Solomon, and basically offered him a free stadium in the northern parts of Hartford, in which he was going to be given a free stadium that was going to be built brand new, and it was going to be part of a downtown north Hartford redevelopment settlement, in which there would be the stadium, there would be housing, both affordable and very expensive housing, and the biggest thing to the northern part of Hartford was that there was going to be an exceptionally large grocery store built so that the citizens of that part of the city would actually have a place to go to buy their food. And I realize Hartford is very, very short of any type of grocery stores, obviously. And most people either have to drive out of the area or take a bus out of the area to buy their groceries, and or they go to very, very small stores and pay an exceptionally large amount of money to buy their groceries. So behind the scenes, this deal was negotiated, and the Hartford City Council approves it, and then it's announced basically to the city of New Britain that the Rockettes are going to be moving to Hartford. They're leaving their contract a year earlier than they were supposed to, and they were going to start playing in this brand new stadium beginning April of this year. So guess what happened? The stadium gets started, the project gets started. It's being started and developed by a company called Middletown Center Plan Development. The CEO of that Middletown Center Plan Development is a gentleman, Robert Landino, who just happens to be a former Democratic state representative that served in Hartford for several years. And his group is trying to build the stadium under a budget of $56 million, which is what apparently the city council bonded for. Now, guess what? There are enormous cost overruns with regards to the stadium to the tune of about $10
the city, stating that every month they've been showing them how much in cost overruns they have. The city says they know nothing about it. But here's the most interesting twist, in my opinion, of the whole project, is that Hartford has a new mayor. His name is Luke Bronin. His wife just happens to be the chairperson of the Hartford Planning and Zoning Commission, which is overseeing this project. When Luke started running for mayor, he was against the development itself in the stadium. But amazingly enough, he came around to endorsing it when in excess of, I don't have an actual figure because it's varying from what I've been researching, of anywhere from $12,000 to $100,000 came into his campaign. Much of this money from all the different developers who are involved in the actual project. So Mr. Bronin got a lot of money from the individuals who are developing this project for his campaign. His wife's the chairperson of the Hartford Planning and Zoning Commission, and everybody is pointing the fingers at everybody else. And the Hartford Yard Goats apparently will be homeless for a good part of April and part of May, because the stadium will not be finished. Now will not be finished until apparently May sometime. But I want to back up a bit. Part of the project agreement was that in October of last year, ground would be broken for the new housing units in the grocery store. And guess what? That has not happened. And there's no idea as to what grocery chain is actually going to be going in there because no one has agreed to it.
I haven't heard a thing.
So it's your guess what's going to actually happen to the rest of the $300 million worth of development going around the stadium, number one. And number two, it's anybody's guess when they're actually going to get a CO so that the team can actually start playing there. And to me, it's just an incredible display of, for lack of a better term, a political development that really has gone bad and may really haunt the city of Hartford and its taxpayers, and also Connecticut taxpayers for many years.
I want to put up with, and from what I understand, what some of the old timers tell me, that was part of the legacy of the G. Fox department store, who wanted everything kind of circling right in front of their stores, and they all went and kind of left us with the dregs. But said all that to say this, Bob. I look at this and I'm saying to myself, Hartford, a baseball town? I just don't see it. You know, I don't see people in Hartford saying, hey, let's go to a ball game. You know, Hartford is one of those...
And the sad part about the whole situation, in my opinion, is New Britain is very much a fever easterly baseball.
Yeah.
I mean, I've gone to many games there since I live in Wallingford. It's a close run right up to Route 9. It's a very nice park where you can park right at the stadium, and reasonable parking fees. You never have to worry about your car getting broken into. Traffic is, it's a nice flow of traffic.
Nice family venue.
I don't understand what Josh Solomon was looking for in moving his team to Hartford, other than he's obviously got some sort of extra deal and extra money he didn't get from New Britain. And I think it's going to come back and bite him badly. And I think this whole exercise of this new stadium is not going to be in anybody's self-interest. The other thing I find interesting, and I'm going to take it from a sports point of view, he's now an affiliate of the Colorado Rockies, which for those Eastern League baseball historians who are listening, the Rockies were the New Haven Ravens AA team.
Yes.
For approximately 10 years, where they were at Yale Field in New Haven. So I don't understand how and why the Rockies would want to come back into Connecticut when they left Connecticut, realizing they had logistical problems, shuttling their players back and forth. And B, it wasn't, New Haven at the end wasn't supporting the Ravens. Their attendance went way down, so on and so forth. I could see the same thing happening in Hartford. I do agree with you, Tony. Who is going to want to go to the north side of Hartford at night
it's I shake my head because there's really not anything that would bring you there other than, hey, let's get out of town. It's getting dark, and
Right.
the
The attraction to the whole development, in theory, is going to be when everything is actually developed there. But to me, that's going to be so far out in the future. You're looking years down the road before I think any other part of that project will actually even be embarked upon, because A, they're going to be short on money, and B, I don't know which grocery chain will go in there and offer to, build a superstore for, selling their product, given the conditions, given the area, given the ability to hire people. They're going to have some massive tax breaks for them to go in there and set up a store.
Now, you raise an interesting point here with the Rockies. And in my life, in my understanding, in my estimation, I do not think that a big club, a major league franchise, makes I'm not even going to say a perpetual commitment, but a multi-year commitment to any one venue, because there's many people who will take a minor league franchise, and if the grass is greener somewhere else and the deal's better and the concessions are better and the crowds are a little bigger, they're off, they're running. It's a nature of the game. I mean, the New York Yankees for years had the Columbus Clippers. They got rid of the Columbus Clippers because their reason, which is almost insulting in modern day baseball parlance, is it was too expensive, Brian Cashman said, to fly the players from Columbus to New York. If we move the franchise to Scranton, they can come in the limousine. And
let's really date ourselves. The West Haven Yankees were a Double-A franchise back in 1972 for the Yankees, and they picked West Haven because there was a short train ride at the time.
Right.
To get their players back and forth to Yankee Stadium if need be. And again, the logistics of the Rockies taking on a Hartford, Connecticut franchise doesn't make sense to me. I was reading today some Colorado Rocky fan blogs, and they were pretty hepped up about it, so on and so forth. But I still don't understand, again, the sheer cross-country movement of your Double-A players, and that just doesn't make sense to me. And that's why I never understood the Eastern League and some of their franchises. They should basically be East Coast teams,
right,
Midwest teams that would, more logically play there than somebody, cross-country type of thing. It's almost like having the Mariners from Seattle have their Double-A team here in Connecticut. You know what I mean? So it doesn't make sense. I want to step back a second, too, and look at the campaign donations, because there's been several articles written. One was written by Jonathan Palto, who has a blog. Was a former Democratic candidate for governor.
yes,
Active in the Democratic Party. He's kind of turned from the Democratic Party. He's more what I call an independent liberal now, as compared to a pure Democrat. And he really ripped apart the amount of campaign donations that went into Bronin's campaign, and it was slightly picked up by the Hartford Current in their investigative reporting, but basically it was fudged over because Bronin received the endorsement of the Hartford Current. No surprise there. And I really believe that there's a serious conflict of interest for the Hartford taxpayers and the developers of this project if the developers of the project basically paid to play for this whole project, and if the cost overruns are going to be accepted by the city and be paid for by the taxpayers in the long run through more bonding or whatever the case may be. It makes no sense to me whatsoever to see that actually occur. But again, that's a big part of the story that to me has been very overlooked by most media, with the exception of the blogging community, and picking up and seeing the donations.
And the amazing thing to me, and that's a terrific point you bring up, is I haven't found one place where I can find the Colorado Rockies have committed to the city of Hartford for X number of years. I haven't seen it. And I guess my question is, what is after, if this is a very bad year and they're spending time on the road and, they're not really happy with the whole thing, what's to say, hey, we're going to Birmingham, Alabama, see ya?
Yeah, there's nothing to say that. And I believe, and from the limited information I try to gather on it, they only have a one-year agreement with Solomon.
Oh, boy.
And I think that's probably what they probably did. They gave him a 1 year with the renewal for a year or two type of situation, in which they said, we'll see how it plays out, and we'll take it from there. I'm very surprised, however, that the Eastern League is not being more proactive about it.
I am too.
I don't understand either why the Eastern League didn't force Solomon to pick a Yale field or pick some other, University of Hartford's baseball field, someplace, so that some of the team could play some of its home games in April at home. You got AA prospects who are probably, in some cases, you might have some bonus babies out there or whatever.
Some people make it up.
They're going to be traveling for a month. That's crazy.
Yeah. It's it's unspeakable. Well, speaking of unspeakable, and
I think they could have come up with a better plan than what they've done playing on the road for 17 games.
I would agree.
And I really believe the Eastern League is going to really think twice in the long run on why they even accepted this and gave New Britain away to independent ball. And I'm sure the New Britain fan base will come out in large numbers to support the new team and see, the different players and the different teams and so on and so forth. And the Hartford fans will be staying away from Hartford as much as they can.
Well,
There's also a provision, which I found interesting in this whole agreement, is that the city of Hartford gets X amount of seats for every game. I guess at no cost to them. And my question is, well, who gets those seats? And why? It doesn't make any sense to me, but it's apparently part of the agreement that they came up with.
It's staggering when you absolutely look at it, and so that we don't run out of time in our discussion of things staggering. We'll keep our eye on this ballpark situation. I shake my head. I mean, part of me wants to say thanks for the information. A part of me says I'm very sorry I heard it. We lost GE. We lost General Electric in this state. And I guess not surprising, now there's a lot of finger pointing going on. Your thoughts and comments about that?
Well, I think there's a lot of different avenues to look at in this whole GE move. I think the biggest reason why GE left is that it sees no strong leadership or economic planning for the state other than you want to continue to raise taxes, you want to continue to place burdens on business. We don't want to operate like that anymore. So we have to protect our own self-interest, the interest of General Electric, and we have to move to a different location, which A, we know we're going to get some tax breaks out of. And number two, though, that we're willing to commit 20, 30 years down the road that we know we're not going to get hammered with increased taxes, increased property taxes, so on and so forth. And I really believe the taxing structure of corporations here in Connecticut, as similar and as unique as they are, I think a lot of companies, especially larger companies, are really thinking twice and saying to themselves, why would you want to locate here? And what is the actual advantage to locating here if you're paying high taxes, if you're paying higher transportation costs, if you're paying higher workers' compensation costs? What's the advantage? What is the caveat that you want to come here and move here? There is nothing. So General Electric called Malloy's bluff. And Malloy obviously, is fluffing it over. The Democrats are blaming the Republicans. Republicans are blaming the Democrats. And a lot of people in between are blaming a government that, to me, is just totally out of control with taxes and totally out of control with spending. I distinctly remember a show I was on with you last year, early part of the year, and we talked about long-term unfunded liabilities of the state of Connecticut.
I recall.
I said at that time probably $60 to $80 billion. No one wants to give me a firm figure on it one way or the other. They're trying to play it down to $40 billion. But think about it. A state this size to be in the hole $40 billion, $50 billion, $60 billion in long-term unfunded liabilities and bonding is completely economically irrational to me. Where has the money gone? It's basically been, open up a window and just throw it out of it, and that's it. But getting back to GE, they called Connecticut's bluff. They will move over the next 2 years. They're happy about it. They got a good deal out of Boston. And Massachusetts is no longer going to be considered as Massachusetts. It'll be more considered back as Massachusetts. And it's a very, very, very big economic hit for the state of Connecticut.
I shudder to think about it. When I heard the information, these days we're at 900 Chapel. We sublease the chamber spaces, and I ran into Tony Resigno, the chamber president, and I walked down the hall and I told him, and he shook his head and he said, we have legislators who actually come out and say, we don't need GE. And he says that for every, he mentioned at that sitting, for every one job that's lost, 1.8 jobs that are thrown off from that are also lost. And I believe me, on a night not to have the chills, Bob, it gives me the chills.
Well, I think it's the hit, I hope, that voters in Connecticut wake up to that say, hey, you got to make a decision. You got to have checks and balances in Hartford. We don't have any checks and balances when you have a one party running the show all the time, and their only thing that they focus on is how much more can we raise in taxes, what new taxes can we raise, and what new spending programs we can create to protect our ruling party. That's the problem in Hartford today. And I really believe it's up to the Republican Party to do everything they humanly need to do to run a candidate against any Democrat running for either state rep or state senate in November. I don't care if you're running a person who you don't think has any chance whatsoever, but at least provide the opportunity that there are two people running for one seat. We have to stop the trend that continues over and over again, where a lot of incumbents just get reelected on both sides of the coin because no one is willing to run against them. And I think part of the problem is that we need to go to a full-time legislature, pay a legislator a normal salary, let's say $50,000 a year, get better people who can run, who could afford to run.
And will run.
Because people, and I'm going to be very blunt, people like myself, I can't afford that kind of pay cut to become a part-time legislator and do that part-time legislating as a full-time job, getting $20,000 a year. I can't afford to live like that. I'm not independently wealthy to do something like that. And that's why we're stuck with so many lawyers. That's why we're stuck with so many people who've been there. They're so entrenched in the system. The system works for them and no one else. And that's part of the problem. That's the problem with our legislature. Or, conversely, go to some sort of different legislative system where you're only going to meet and you only got 30 days to make a budget, and that's all you're going to spend your time on. And that's it.
Well, our legislators is so, how could I put it? They're so famously known for getting some little tangential thing that just gobbles up the session, and nothing else ever really seems to happen.
Correct. And then, I looked at a recent article by State Senator Ted Kennedy Jr. there out of Branford, who is going to be the heir apparent to the 3rd Congressional District if and when Rosa DeLauro retires. He wants to ban plastic bags. Now, that's the most critical issue in the state of Connecticut, is whether or not you go to the Big Y and you get a plastic bag to put your groceries in.
Yeah, you're a communist.
I mean, it makes no sense to me whatsoever that you're that concerned with plastic bags. It's a fixation billion in the whole year in low. Don't worry about that. The plastic bag will resolve all the issues. It's ridiculous. It's truly ridiculous.
It's so
and
typical.
GE, I think, is going to be the symbol, in my opinion, of the November election. And closely behind GE is going to be the irrational transportation plan in which they want to bring back tolls and raise taxes, raise gas taxes, on and on and on, to build whatever in these $100 billion project of Malloy's transportation idea, which we still don't know what it encompasses, nor do we understand where the money's going to go to, and nor do we understand what it's going to try to resolve. And, you have a crumbling infrastructure in which your only concern is throwing $100 billion at it. Back up a bit, Metro North New Haven line to New York City needs over $16 million in improvement.
A pathetic railroad.
System if there ever was one. So what's the governor do? He puts $16 million in Amtrak from Springfield to Hartford, Wallingford. For what reason is beyond me, because nobody's going to use it anyways. Because
Very few.
The Amtrak fares are much higher than Metro North. And you're not bringing people from place A to place B. Or his fast track program, which was only supposed to cost $10 million, he increased the funding for it by 70%, $17 million for the next fiscal year. And he can't come up with any idea of how many rides are how many people are actually being transferred.
I've seen the double-decker buses with two people on them. And,
It's incredible. It's incredible.
It is absolutely insane. Bob, I can't believe it. We're out of time. In our closing moments, where can our friends and fans reach you?
Swick SwickSpeakBlogspot.com, my weekly column. You could also find it on Capital Report 2016.
And also through this show. Bob, thanks so much. Stay warm, and we'll have you on soon to talk about these developments as they develop.
Okay, thank you, Tony, for having me on.
Take care. Good night. And that was Bob Swick, and we're going to be coming back, and we'll be calling Miss Kathy Garver, so you guys just sit back. Hopefully you're warmer than I am. Have a real good time watching this show, and we'll be back in a moment here on Tony D'Angelo's Coast to Coast.
Sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows. Everything that's wonderful is what I feel when
We got her, and she's here, Miss Kathy Garver. You know her as the sissy on Family Affair. You know her from a lot of other places. Kathy's really been a staple of my life, watching her in all kinds of things, and she has such a varied and wonderful career. Now she is an author with her new book, Surviving Sissy, My Life and Times in Hollywood. And Kathy's calling us from Los Angeles, where I understand it's a little warmer there, Kathy, than it is here. We're dealing with about 15 degrees, and it's dark, and there's snow swirling. And it's
Well, it's very cold in California for Californians. I mean, I think it must be 59 degrees, and there's like rain. Californians don't know what to do with rain. So everyone has their galoshes on and their parkas and hats and umbrellas, and they're dressed for weather like you have in Connecticut, I think.
It's, yeah, it really is something. I guess, well, it's either Mark Twain that said, if you don't like the weather in New England, just sit around and wait a while, or George Carlin that says, tonight we will have weather. And that's absolutely for sure. But...
And Mark Twain also said, because I'm actually live in San Francisco, and I happen to be down in Los Angeles for some meetings, and he said, the coldest summer I ever spent, the coldest winter I ever spent was the summer in San Francisco. Of course, that probably doesn't mean anything to the
I've been
on the West Coast. That the wind from the bay is quite chilly.
And it's so changeable. You know, it's like you're walking, hey, this is great, and it just switches, and you're thinking, what happened?
Right. And then you have, I mean, this is when whole interview about weather, I know, but I just got back from Palm Springs. I was doing a book signing at this wonderful store called Just Fabulous, and I was in the swimming pool, which was nice and heated, and I looked up into the mountains, and there was snow, and then juxtaposed with this wonderful palm tree. And so it was 75 during the day and 43 at night. So that's quite a change, but at least we were prepared for that change.
It really is unbelievable. But in reading your book, dear, you've had such an incredible career, and going back, you actually got started in show business at a very young age.
Do you call 7 young?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Well, Tony, I got started at a very young age. It's rather an epic movie that is still seen today, many years later, because it was such a classic, and that was The Ten Commandments, directed by the brilliant Cecil B. DeMille, starring the fabulous Charlton Heston.
And
Every Easter.
yeah,
I fade out.
I think you faded out there.
Oh, okay. I'm parked on the top street in LA doing this radio interview, so I hope I don't get obscured by the trees. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Okay, good. So I was saying that I started my career at 7 in The Ten Commandments with Cecil B. DeMille and Charlton Heston.
And do you have vivid recollections of that?
I do. And when you're a child, what I remember so much are the senses and tastes and the feelings and the visual imagery of the set itself. I mean, there were hordes of people that were slaves, and there were donkeys, and there were camels, and I remember all of it vividly. I actually recount that in my book, and also some other apocryphal tales that took place.
And it's you had more or less kind of grown up in the Hollywood acting, going to school, being on television culture, and was that a pressurized existence? Is this something that you wanted to do, or your parents wanted you to do, or did you consider it to be, oh, this is just life as being a normal kid?
Well, I have another book that is coming out after my Surviving Sissy book. We're doing actually a second reprint of that one because it's the 50th anniversary of Family Affairs, strange to me, since I'm 39. The next book, April 15th, is Ex-Child Stars, Where Are They Now? And I recount the lives of a lot of children and stars that were popular in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s on television shows, and what their lives were, and how some were able to go on, and some unfortunately met tragedy in their life. Personally, my parents always had me think of acting that I really didn't crow about it, and if I had to, like the Ten Commandments, and I was gone for a while, and I came back, and my mom, oh, don't tell them you're doing a movie, just tell them you were out, that's all you have to say. So she tried to keep me as normal, quote unquote, as possible. And that, I think, kind of worked to an extent. I'm very normal, I'm very down to earth, but it also didn't make me publicize what I have done. So it has its pros and cons, but I'm still here.
No, you really, really, really are. And when you were a young actress, a child actress, did you have role models that you were emulating as you were doing your work?
Well, my parents had moved from Oklahoma, and I went to, and we all came to Los Angeles, and my mother loved Shirley Temple, didn't everyone? My next book is dedicated to her, as a matter of fact. And she put me into a dance and singing class run by Ethel Megalyn, where Shirley Temple was discovered. So, and she put my hair in ringlets. So I always thought Shirley Temple was darling, and so she was kind of a role model. I tapped danced and sang, and I didn't do On the Good Ship Lollipop, but I did my own song.
Yeah, and that was really well. Shirley Temple, I believe, modeled a number of girls to go a certain way. Esther Williams got girls interested in swimming. I mean, that was the influence that Hollywood had on young people those days. I imagine it still has an influence today. Perhaps not always a positive one, but there really were great societal changes due to Hollywood actors and characterizations.
Well, absolutely. In Palm Springs, I've just been invited back February 11th to 18th, and they're having a whole modernism week. And it was what the architecture was like during that period, and what the culture was like, and what were those role models, and how they've changed, obviously, today because of social media and Twitter and Instagram. And as you say, some of those models are not particularly good, I don't believe, for our children growing up or our tweeners growing up. Some of the lyrics to the songs, etc. And I hope that parents take a little bit more charge. I mean, my son now is 24, but, he was into rapping and all of that stuff, and they go through phases. As long as you can keep associated with your child, I think, and know what they're doing. But there was a whole different kind of feeling and atmosphere during that modernism, like 55 to 67, I think they call the modernism period. What a wonderful place to go back to and you have a sense of nostalgia and a comfort with so many things that are going on that are hard for anyone to deal with today, with ISIS and ice in Connecticut and tornadoes and everyday things that people have to deal with.
And, I will, in the days to come, I'll contact you about your appearance in Palm Springs. We'll be going through there. I'd like to come by and say hello to you at that time. But
please do. I have a star on the Walk of Stars there.
Yeah, and
it's colorful. Ruta Lee, who is a good friend of mine, is a wonderful actress and very effervescent. And after I quoted her in the book, because when I got my star laid in cement on Palm Canyon, I quoted her, and Ruta said when she got her star, "Oh, I never thought I'd be laid on Palm Canyon."
Oh my dear, oh my dear, oh my dear.
Even at 24, Mom, did you really say that? I was quoting, honey. I was quoting my friend. Oh, all right. He's pretty conservative for a 24-year-old.
Oh my dear. As far as writing the book and the journey through your life, was it cathartic? Was it difficult in spots? Was it joyful? What was it like?
It was all those things. Because I started from when I was born till today. And there were many things that were difficult writing about. Part of my book, Surviving, is like a power of perseverance. I'm happy to say that so many people who have read the book and reviewed it, they said, "I'm so inspired by your book." I certainly didn't write it to be inspiring. I just was chronicling what happened to me in my particular life and some ways that I got through it and continue to have joy and really enjoy every day that I awaken.
And it's, I read it, and it was many marvelous stories. One of the stories I liked is how you were chosen for the sissy role in Family Affair. Can you talk about that?
Well, yes, I had been working, as we've discussed, since I was 7, so I had a large background in theater and film and radio and stage. And for this particular role, they wanted a blonde, blue-eyed girl to go along with the rest of the family. They had already cast Brian Keith as the uncle and Johnny Whitaker to play Jody, who had reddish hair and blue eyes, and Anita Jones, who had darkish hair but was blonde for the series and dark eyes. Well, there I am, sitting with dark hair and dark eyes. But they needed the the last person for the cast, the teenage sister Sissy, and so my agent had called, and she says, "Oh, they want to see you this afternoon over at Desilu Studios, but they want a blonde." So I said, "Oh, okay." So I called my mother right away. I was at that time attending UCLA, and I was in a sorority, and so she speeds over to the sorority house with this can. What is that? And she says, "This is good. This is good." And it happened to be a can of streaks and tips. And so you spray this stuff on your hair, and your hair is supposed to then lighten up. Well, she sprayed and she sprayed. So I walk out of the sorority feeling and probably looking like something from James Bond Goldfinger with this helmet of blonde on my head. So fast forward, and I'm sitting in the office with the producer, and we're chatting, and we're having kind of a nice time. And then, all of a sudden, he almost does like a double take, and he said, "What is wrong with your hair?" My hair? Chuckling a little. He said, "Yes, it's turning green." Oh, well. And so I'm, thinking some of it must be the light. But anyway, it broke the ice, and I got the part, and the rest is history.
It's amazing. Now, I also thought a particularly interesting story was when you found out that Family Affair was being canceled, and that must have been a horrible day.
Well, it was okay. I think that it had run its course. It was almost put on ABC, and they were just about to sign on the dotted line, but they had just then presented another family show that had 6 kids, and one of whom looked a lot like Buffy. And they went for that fresher show, which was called The Brady Bunch.
Mm-hmm.
So I went on to do other things, went to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art after I graduated from UCLA and did plays and had a big voiceover career, and I still do. I'm a producer of films, and we have a couple coming out this year. So I'm a busy person and enjoying every minute of it.
Now, I was, we can talk secrets here. I was a huge Hollywood Squares fan. And, you would show up there, on occasion, and I would just sit back and roar. And was that a difficult show to do, or was it fun, or was it a little bit of both? Because there was so much action.
I loved it. It was really fun. I love game shows. I love puzzles. I love that whole thing. And we would do 2 or 3 shows in one evening. And so everybody usually had shorts on or jeans, and then they just changed their tops. We're sitting there in different tops, and I would be doing needlepoint or knitting, waiting till somebody asked me a question. And a lot of the writers had written those jokes for some of the regular members. So the guest people that like me, we were kind of on our own to come up with a witty retort. But then I started doing it for more appearances, and then the writers started writing me jokes. But it was a hoot. I mean, the people were just so funny, and I really loved it.
Yeah, I mean, Peter Marshall was the perfect straight man. He was, I loved him. I really did. And when you left Family Affair, did you keep in touch with anyone in the cast?
I did with Anissa and Brian, primarily. And unfortunately, when I went to Anissa's 18th birthday party, and her mom took me aside and said, Anissa, Kathy, I wish you'd spend some more time with Anissa because I think she's in with a bad crowd. And I said, I would love to, but the next day I was leaving to go back east for 3 months to do a play, and unfortunately it was during that time when she overdosed and died, and that was just really devastating.
Was she a victim of, shall we say, the Hollywood system, or was she pushed into acting, or she couldn't find herself, or any combination of the above, or all combinations of the above?
Combination of the above. I think she really enjoyed it, like the first year, and she was just bright as she could be, very smart, and But then when the third year came about, and, you know, this poor child had really no rest. When the show was over, then she'd be whisked away for a weekend to do publicity appearances or do prints, and her mother, unfortunately, was kind of a stage mother and pushed her. And so, also, she was 8 years old when she started the show. So you think 5 years later, she's 13 now, and she's carrying around a doll, and she has a little tiny, you know, short dress on with a big gown, and she wanted to be a teenager. She didn't want to be a little girl. And so it was, after the show, she didn't want to do another TV show, a movie. She was offered the part in The Exorcist. And so she was trying to find herself. And I think that's what's so difficult for today's tweeners and the ones that are on television and become television stars. There's so much attention through Twitter and social media, and oh my goodness, what if you get a blemish on your cheek? The entire, you know, millions of people know about it, and here you are just trying to grow up and go from a child to a teenager to an adult. So it's, I think emotionally and mentally, it's very difficult on the kids today, and it was difficult for Anissa.
And you know, I certainly don't want to leave this interview with the fact that you mentioned in the book you had a lot of personal things to deal with. Your husband's grave illness and recovery, the burning down of your house, other things up and down. What sustained you through the difficulty, Kathy?
God, a higher spirit. I think that personally, God doesn't give you more than you can handle, and you say, oh my gosh, I mean, this is horrible. How am I ever going to get through this? And I said, I'm going to get through it. I believe in a higher spirit. I'm going to listen to what is told me, and I'm going to follow on that path. And it comes out, and it comes out okay. And you just have to stick with it, I think, and not get overwhelmed by so many things that are happening. Take it step by step, and pretty soon all the pieces are together for that particular crisis. Then you go on to some joyful thing, and then another crisis appears. Get through that crisis, another joyful thing. Life is in cycles, but Joey, I believe, have to have that faith that it's all going to work out just as it should.
Believe God and keep moving forward. I can't think of better advice than that. Believe it or not, we're just about running out of time. We know where to get your book. We can get it on Amazon. Where will you be appearing? Where can we look to see you in the future? You did mention Palm Springs in February. Tell us where else.
Well, I'm doing a speech on the power of perseverance in San Mateo on January the 28th. And then I'm doing another speech at the Girl Cave in Huntington Beach. That's February the 28th. I'm doing a new movie called Heaven with a Gun that we start shooting in March. And in May, I'm doing another movie called Just Go For It. And so that's, and then my other book launches April 15th, the Ex-Child Stars. And I'll be doing a lot of book signings, and maybe I'll come to Connecticut.
When you do, let me know. We'll blow open everything for you. Kathy, we're honored once again. God bless you. Thank you. Continued success, and I will get to you in the days to come about coming to meet you over in Palm Springs.
That sounds great. So you can go to my website too and leave a message there at kathygarver.com or my Facebook.
Great. Yeah, no, I know we communicate there from time to time. Godspeed getting back to San Francisco. Stay well. Thank you once again.
Thanks, Tony.
Bye now. What can I say? Kathy Garver, and just a lovely lady, and just a wonderful example to us all. We're going to be winding out of here in a second. We'll be getting into some warmth and be talking about next week's show. The nearness of you. I better get near to something because it's cold in the studio. We'll be right back.
It's not the pain